time you are near. Just like me, they long to be close to you. Close to you. Close to you. Close to you.
Secret Hill by Zoe Young. Part 1. Bishop Burrows. It only takes one good look at your neighbours, your boss, your shopkeeper, and you become all too aware of the illusion they have prepared for you. They've gone out of their way to show you an attractive enhancement to the decay beneath the surface, which you'll always appreciate, because nobody wants to be exposed to the crumbling frame that supports the fabric of our being. The icing on the cake, so to speak. Bishop Burrows knew exactly what frosting to use when occasion needed it. The town was filled with crumbling frames, painted in veils. Twisting trees breathe life in between the cracks of the shattered, aged alleyways. They nestled behind a row of a once grandiose plethora of Victorian homes. Their walls cracked the same as the streets, split with subtleties around the window frames. And inside, a decadent post-war reconstruction, a gallery of painted walls, pictures, and furniture that would flatter the enchantment and intricacies of the original Victorian architecture. The staircase would glide with a polished oak handrail and perfectly formed wooden panelling, laying an elegant walkway to the equally perfectly polished rooms that filled the second floor. In this particular home, the scent of cream vanilla floated in the hallway, oozing from the bedroom of Thomas and Jeannette. The candles were lit in an effort to bring peace to a troubling pregnancy, one which Jeannette found fueled her with an ever-changing mood and debilitating nausea. But tonight was the night she had prayed for. Her child was itching to be born, and as this came so suddenly, any notion of having a hospital birth was quickly abandoned. Thomas had stayed by her side throughout, and he was not keen to give up on his patients so soon. This was his child. This was his partner, his home, and his bed. He'd reached out earlier on the telephone and called the out-of-hours doctors, but to no avail. He'd called the emergency services, who promised their arrival as soon as they could, but unfortunately not soon enough. He covered the bed in clean towels, that quickly soiled as he laid Jeannette down onto the cushioned throne he built from scattered pillows and robes. She screamed and bit down on one of the silk pillows as she struggled to push her child out into the world. Thomas panicked, but he knew he could not wait for any saviour. The snow had been thick outside of the town. Getting through would take at least 3 times as long as it should, and therefore all hope laid on the two of them. A relationship built on only 1 year, the surprise of a pregnancy holding them dear. At last, as the clock struck 12:33 a.m., a frosted morning in December, their child had arrived. At 12:38, so too did the emergency services, and to their surprise, Jeannette's body was going cold, her blood pooling to the floor. Eight years later, 1974. Sluggish nights swathed the land of the consistently ordinary town of Bishop Burrows. The moonlight was always dull, the clouds always looming. The excitement of Mother Nature cast a shadow over the town as the people always watched, shunned to live forever on the sidelines, never quite in the midst of great events. The storms only sparked electricity in the distance, and the rain always fell harder atop of the hill that towered between the town and the tangy Fisher's Port, leaving the air within their streets in a seemingly permanent, wet, stale essence. For the hill not only took away the fresh rainfall, but made the wind that drafted crisp air from the sea impassable from its widespread frame. They named this Secret Hill, for the wonders that laid afar would never be brought to the presence of those who chose to stay among this ordinary town. But sometimes the rain does make it above them, and although gentle, it trickles against the windows enough to say hello, and wets the soil just enough for the vegetables to take root, just as it had done to entice this town to cling on to it for over 2,000 years. Its origins had never truly been realized, and its age has never been given the attention it deserves by intrigued historians. As typical behavior suggests for those who are easily distracted, almost everyone who set foot in Bishop Burrows have been captivated more by the secrets beyond the hill than by the secrets that lay right beneath their feet. When the town spoke of Secret Hill, rumours surpassed that of slight ignorance that created the name. Tales of mystery and intrigue brought visitors, but tales were all the town had to offer, and at no point had there ever been any indication to suggest that there was more to these simple rumours. Therefore, there was never any more than a few passengers, floating through for no longer than a day. Like any small town in the north of England, there was retail, bakers, pubs, churches, everything you could wish for, only a short walk away into the centre from any direction. The offices stuck to the middle, and the schools clung to the residential areas, aiming to appease the family with the safety of their familiar grounds. Unlike some smaller towns, Bishop Burrows was not one for those who struggled financially in life, although the scenery was not as appeasing as others. The place was quaint, and always showed signs that at some point, everything built was loved and cared for from those who kept hope that one day the town may flourish against the odds of the weather that continuously plagued them. There may be cracks, but the consistent pruning kept the audiences away from them. The rain trickled onto the ruby umbrella Jeannette gripped closely to her as she fidgeted, waiting for the school gates to release her baby girl. She stared directly onto the wooden timber frame around the front doors, having never noticed the peeling paint this much before. Her attention drew to the original Victorian stone that still outlined the side of the building. It was grey, crumbling, and clearly in need of repair. For what she pays in taxes, she was expecting the keepers to at least maintain the structure of what once must have been an impressive building. The grout, though, was literally falling to the floor, covering the edges in a dusty mess, hiding within the weeds. Did they know it was there? Do they actually observe what's going on around them? Or are they just too interested in maintaining the flower beds that no one even notices are there? The doors flung open by two of the school's assistants, before one of them ran to unlock the school gates. After a beat, the children flooded out onto the entryway, running to whose face brought them enough familiarity and comfort that they were feeling desperate enough to run towards. One of the boys, who Jeannette recognized from his distinguishing tight red curls, was one from her daughter's classes, and as always, he ran at full speed before leaping into the air to push over his little brother. His mother screamed at him to behave before grabbing his school bag and switching it for a bright blue packet of Smith's salt and vinegar crisps. After the flutter of children leaving for the day, Jeannette still waited, more than unimpressed at the fact that she wasn't immediately able to leave like those around her. Why, when it rains, does she always have to be caught in it? "Miss White?" "Yes," Jeannette replied before looking up to see the face of a very concerned, frowning Mr. Hahn towering behind her daughter, and her daughter seemed almost unfazed that the head of the year was escorting her out of the building. However, Jeannette was mortified in front of the remaining others. "Oh, how lovely to see you, Mr. Hahn. Darlene." "Darlene?" Her daughter ignored her call, and instead twisted her finger around a mound of her hair and stared blankly at the open gates before her. With a call more irritated than before, Darlene slowly rolled her eyes towards her mother's before glaring back towards the school gates. It was clear both did not want to be in this situation any more than the other. "Miss White, I need to talk to you about Darlene's recent behaviour." Jeannette, too, slowly rolled her eyes towards Mr. Hahn, after accepting her daughter's disregard to herself. "Do you have a moment?" asked Mr. Hahn. Jeannette paused. She grit her teeth and she closed her eyes, before nodding towards the school entrance. Darlene, realizing she would have to turn back and go into the grounds of the place she was trying to escape, groaned and looked longingly towards her mother. But Jeannette ignored her moans and ushered them all out of the rain and over to the cover of the school's entryway. "I appreciate this, Miss White. I won't keep you long, I promise." Jeannette's blank expression was already enough to explain that he was keeping her, and Mr. Hahn understood the hint. "As I'm sure you were aware, it was the twins' birthday today. Tom and Nicholas?" Jeannette continued with her blank expression. "Darlene threw their cake on the floor. No, she said it was an accident, and she didn't know how heavy it would be, but that's not all. Some of the teachers have heard the kids talking over the weeks. I mean, they haven't directly spoken to any of us, so we can't report it officially." Mr. Hahn noticed how extremely unresponsive Jeannette had poised herself, and how desperately Darlene didn't take notice of anything other than the exit. And therefore, he chose to just come out with it. "Miss White, Darlene's been bullying the other children, and for some reason, when they're questioned, nobody wants to report it. But today's actions have proved quite frankly her sheer disrespect to not only her peers, but to the good nature of our celebrations. Unless we catch her in the act, we can't discipline her. So she hasn't done anything, apart from drop a cake. The slicing of her words stunned Mr. Hahn. She has, Miss White. But for some reason the children do not want to report her. They're scared of her. Genuinely frightened. Okay. Thank you for letting me know. I'll speak to her at home. Jeannette grabbed Darlene by the arm to leave the building before Mr. Hahn's final and very worried voice stopped her. Please, Miss White. Can we arrange some time for you to view her work? The disturbance in his voice rattled Jeannette. Her thoughts about her own child were being passed on to others. She nodded in agreement. I can tomorrow, Mr. Hahn. 11 a.m.? Mr. Hahn smiled, his face relaxing at the relief. Oh, thank you, Mrs. White. Thank you. That will be fine. I'll be available all morning. Jeannette and Mr. Hahn held their gaze for a moment, their eyes whispering uncertainty and a comforting empathy. The walk home was mere minutes, but when the rain dampened their journey, it always felt longer, no matter how fast they paced. Darlene and Jeannette did not speak a word to each other. They charged hand in hand at a fast pace, the street water splashing up their coats and soiling their boots. This seemed a standard return for an October Thursday. Jeannette did not always have the luxury to pick up her child at the end of the school day, nor did she have the time to take her there. But Thursdays was a regular trip. Every other trip was left to the safe hands of her friend and neighbour, Shirley. As they approached the steps to their front door, Jeannette fumbling to find her key, the rain that patted against them like little feet, following them home, flurried off and left them ready to be surrounded by a dainty mist. Once the door was opened, Darlene scurried inside, threw her raincoat onto the hanger, and placed her boots neatly onto the rack below, before skipping off to the toy box she had in the living room. Jeannette followed, placing her coat, umbrella, and boots neatly in the appropriate positions, but instead headed straight to the kitchen to place the kettle onto the hob. As the kettle boiled, she gazed out of the kitchen window onto the back garden, or what she used to call her garden. The patio had become a forest for weeds. The furniture was mostly mould, and the fence had been taken over by the trees that overpowered the back alley, their branches hanging frighteningly close to her bedroom window above. It was the same bedroom she had always had, ever since she herself was a child, and the midnight tapping from the branches weren't enough for her to dedicate herself to another room. As the kettle steamed, its whistle creeping in slowly before blasting into a great squeal, Jeannette caught the back of her daughter's reflection in the window. She was kneeled over, assumingly digging through the toys. Quickly, she brewed her tea, poured out a cold glass of orange juice, and placed all the drinks and the last of a packet of bourbons onto a plastic tray, to bring it all into the living room, and place upon a dusty and rather overused coffee table. Darlene looked quite sweet in her pleated skirt, fumbling around with the small toy train set. Her long golden hair was sodden enough to stick to her face, and it frizzed at the back. Jeannette placed herself onto the armchair, cup of tea in one hand, and picked up the magazines from the coffee table with the other, slowly flicking through the pages as she silently blew away the steam. Darlene noticed the tray of biscuits and the orange juice, but continued to lay down the track for her train set. She never did rush for the luxuries of nourishment, She always prioritized what occupied her mind in the present moment, rather than be distracted. Knowing that, Jeannette always tried to encourage her daughter to do what she thought was more important, and if she had gone out of her way to acquire that something would always shoot to the top of the list over anything her daughter had chosen. "Darling, would you please put that down and have your snack?" Darlene's face froze for 1 second as she took in what her mother had to say, before swiftly carrying on with fixing down her train track. "Darlene, I have asked you to do something," Darlene continued. "Darla, put that down and take what Mummy has prepared for you." Darlene slowly rolled her eyes, placed down what she had in her hand, and quietly sat by the coffee table to very slowly eat one of the biscuits. "Make sure you drink the juice too, Darla. Don't just fill yourself up on biscuits." "But I'm not thirsty," Darlene replied. "Well, you will be later, so drink it now." With that, Darlene grabbed the glass, stared into her mother's eyes until she had chugged the entire drink down to the bottom in one sitting, allowing the juice to dribble down her mouth and drip onto her white school shirt. When she was done, she gently placed the glass onto the tray and wiped her mouth with her grey skirt. Jeannette hadn't noticed the state of the skirt prior to this. Mud darkened the edges, and there was clearly what was handprints from her lunch smeared down the side.
"Oh, Darla, that uniform is disgusting."
Jeannette winced. "Go upstairs and take it off and find something clean, please. Make sure you put it in the basket." Darlene did not say a word of acknowledgement. She stood up silently and did exactly as told. The thought of her daughter being that filthy in public did more harm to Jeannette than it did to Darlene. The tea she had made did not last long, but it was enough to warm her from the drizzling outside and the unnerving encounter she had with Mr. Hahn. She placed the cup onto the tray to take back into the kitchen, and before she left the living area, she kicked the toy train track to the side, next to Darlene's toy box, and noticed within the open lid a doll she bought for her last birthday. The head and the arms had been cut. The plastic torso looked to be pushed in, and, if she could tell right, from where she was stood, had it also been burned? Although this was concerning for Jeannette, it wasn't unusual. She proceeded to the kitchen, set on completing her current tasks before acknowledging the next. She swiftly turned on the hot tap and squirted some of the fairy liquid into the sink to fill it with foams of silky bubbles. She'd ignored the mess she created from her lunch earlier that day, deciding now it was a poor decision. One of the things her mother taught her was to keep her hands busy, for if we don't, our mind may wander, and it may lie to us. Jeannette took her time soaking her hands in the sink, letting the heat burn her skin and tingle her fingers, rising up to steam her chest. She got a strange sense of pleasure from the pain that came with it. Eventually, her whole body would feel the heat, and everything around her would silence as she wrapped herself up in this small, private moment of bliss.
On the day that you were born, the angels got together and decided to create a dream come true. So they sprinkled moon dust in your hair and golden starlight in your eyes of blue.
After the pots had been washed, she drained the sink, feeling much more settled than she did prior, and relief had relaxed her into a slight daze. However, when she turned around, Darlene startled her. She hadn't noticed her reflection in the window. She just stood there, still and straight, almost as if her legs and her arms had been pinned to her body. Darlene had removed her clothes, but not changed into anything clean as requested, which in turn horrified her mother. She was unsure where to look or who could be looking. "Darla, where are your clothes?" "You told me to take them off, Mummy." "Yes, and to put something on that was clean." "There wasn't anything clean." "There was always something clean. Come with me, now." Jeannette grabbed Darlene by the arm and forced her up the stairs, to which Darlene squirmed in pain as her mother's hot hand pinched at her skin. She ensured Darlene went first as she pointed towards the bedroom, kitchen towel in hand, threatening any wrong movement. Darlene's bedroom was the first at the top of the stairs, and it was evident already that she wasn't going to like what she saw inside. As the door flung open, she noticed her daughter's toys scattered the floor. Clothes were flung from the wardrobe, and they too mounted the floor on top of the toys. Her dirty school uniform spilled out of the laundry basket in the corner. Jeannette demanded an answer as to why the room was so filthy, but Darlene did not have an answer to give. So instead of arguing with her child, Jeannette grabbed a wool dress from the floor and threw it at her daughter's bed. But she realized as her hand felt damp and almost sticky that maybe her daughter was right. She looked at the dress that was flung across the bedding. It was brown, which she remembered was correct for the dress. But the dark red that smeared across the white bedding was not how it was supposed to be. Fear stoned her face. She gazed down to her damp hand, and it too was a darkened red. Slowly, she stepped around the room. All the clothes scattered had been soaked in something other than the rain. The floor was not wet, smeared, or even showed a drop of this peculiar substance. There were no new marks on the ceiling, no evidence of the window opening. Her hand plagued her. She stared deeply at it as Darlene began to sob. Slowly, she brought her hand close to her face, shaking. She smelled it. There was no odor. And so she licked it. Not a small touch with the end of her tongue, but a spread out wipe across her palm to gauge all of her taste buds at once. It was sweet, metallic, but very quickly turned bitter. A sharp pain shot into her eye and into the back of her head. She winced and pressed her temples in agony. She looked up at her daughter, who was still sobbing, as she too looked down at her hands that was covered in this dark substance. "Darlene, come here." Jeannette opened her arms for her daughter, to which she reluctantly came into. Jeannette swooped her up, holding her tight. She wasn't sure how to feel. She wasn't sure what had happened. Why was her daughter like this? And what on earth was this substance covering her daughter's clothing? She took them into the bathroom down the hallway, and they gently washed each other's hands in the sink. When they were clean, Darlene gave her mother a short, tired smile, the first of a smile she had shown in a long while. Jeannette held her daughter by her shoulders and looked into her eyes. She began to talk quite softly, but soon couldn't help some sternness lead the way. "We're going to find you something to wear. I'm going to clean the dirty clothes, okay? And you are going to go and find something to do downstairs. When I'm done, I'll make dinner. When we've eaten, we're going to talk, okay?" Darlene nodded, brushed her hair out of the way, and slowly pulled herself over to her bedroom. Her hand dragged across the wooden panelling in the corridor. They both nervously walked into the room. Jeannette, struggling to look unfazed by the situation, headed to the small chest of drawers opposite the foot of the bed. It didn't appear to have been opened or tampered with, and therefore there must have been something unsoiled available to wear. And indeed there was. A long brown woolen skirt and a light pink t-shirt beamed from within. She smiled proudly, turned to give them to her daughter, and kissed her on the cheek. And then, as though she was doing her everyday cleaning, Jeannette gracefully, now undisturbed and with a mission, skipped downstairs and grabbed a bucket of water, a sponge, and a plastic sack from under her kitchen sink. Then she skipped back up the stairs to whistle as she popped the soiled items into it. Darlene frowned at her as she got changed from the corner of her room, and when she was fully dressed, she skulked out of the room, unwilling to gauge her mother's attention. Cleaning was something Jeannette had always enjoyed. It kept her hands busy, and her mind free to converse with the safety of her thoughts. This was always an act she thanked her mother for guiding her towards, and it was always something she wished Darlene would be as happy to learn. Unfortunately, though, her daughter was never a very stimulating child to her. She always spoke of trains and outside games, as though this was something that was going to gauge her mother's interest as much as it did hers. It did not, and Jeannette grew tired of pretending to pay attention to what she spoke of. Now, if her father was still here, he'd have at least occupied her with those things so that she wouldn't constantly crave her mother's attention. Jeannette stopped scrubbing as her whole thought pattern suddenly froze. Every muscle in her body tensed, so that her lungs stopped inhaling, and her heartbeat sprang punches in her chest. The veins upon her head swelled, and her eyes bulged. A wisp of black smoke puffed from her nose, as slowly her body squeezed out the air inside of her. And then as quickly as it took her, her body reverted to normality. And so she continued to sponge the floor without any reaction of her former situation. As Jeannette wiped clean the last of the mess and decorated the duvet in new covers, a strong sense of calm had made peace within her. Flowers. That's what this room needs, Jeannette thought. The bedroom had recently been decorated, pink wallpaper and painted skirting boards, polished floorboards, and velvet curtains. But there was one thing that was missing, and maybe it's flowers that will fill the void. With her foot, Jeannette pushed the neatly packed basket of toys under the bed, out of view. It was now 6 p.m. in the White household. Jeannette gazed out onto the street from her daughter's bedroom, watching the mist thicken and the orange blur from the street lights peek through as the sun proceeds to set behind Secret Hill. Normally, dinner would be on the table, but as there was a small interruption to the late afternoon, Jeannette struggled to think what she could scramble together that both appeased the appetite and waste. The home she lived in had been a part of her family for nearly 100 years. The property hadn't been renovated since 1953, so when there were strange sounds that creaked within the bones of the property, it wasn't unusual. But she had lived there for 38 years, so she knew well the songs her walls whistled and her floorboards squeaked. When something made an unusual twist to those sounds, she picked up on it immediately. At first, she wondered if this was the roof. Tiles had been found on the front porch repeatedly for the last year. It was above her. But no, this was not the roof. This was the floorboards to her attic. Jeannette felt almost called towards the sound, dazed, but with an aim, hypnotized. Her arms fell gracefully to her side, her neck relaxed, and she wandered towards the hallway. The ladder to the attic was tucked neatly within the study, and so she quietly collected it to make her way to the covered hole in her ceiling. Once she was up, it took a great push to remove the board that blocked her entryway. It had been the better half of a year since she could remember being up there. She had forgotten the dust that would cover her whenever she entered, and coughed her way through, pulling her body high enough in so she could get a good look. The only light that was available in her attic was that of a large industrial-shaped bulb, only connected to the wire and not fitted into the ceiling. It switched on at the bulb, which she always left by the opening for quick and easy access. But for some reason, this was nowhere to be seen. She squinted and allowed time for her eyes to adjust to the darkness. The ceiling was high and pointed. The pigeons would be audible, and their coos would bounce around the wooden beams. As always, the dampness could be tasted on her tongue, and embedded itself into her clothing. After scrambling around with the palm of her hand, she found the lighting wire, and slowly pulled it towards her. As she did so, a chill tickled her neck. Goosebumps flooded her arms. There was a breeze coming in somewhere. She was just unable to see exactly where. The wire was suddenly stuck. It was tugged on something. Something big, awkward, and so she pulled herself further in onto her stomach, the bottom of her legs being the only thing dangling out of the exit. But she couldn't quite reach. Dread stifled her movements. She stayed perfectly still. Jeannette's jaw dropped. Her eyes swelled. What was that sound? She kept her body low to the ground, slowly turning her head to see what was behind her. The light from her hallway was beaming through, but it only showed the shadows of the boxes. The empty, bare air, and the old nursing rocking chair, lightly swaying from the breeze that too brushed her skin. Childish fears. That's all. So Jeannette pulled herself further in, her feet dangling off the edges. But then she found it, the blockage. It was soft, but hard. It appeared to be that of hard denim, a mound of clothes on top of the wire. She pushed what she could out of the way and tugged. The bulb quickly came towards her and she grinned, fumbling around to click on its switch. She forgot to block her eyes. The light blinded her for a few moments, so she tucked her head in for the sting to ease. And when it did, she blinked hard. her face grimacing before she revealed the room to her eyes. Before her laid a pile of blood-soaked clothes. The denim she felt was that of a jacket, soaked and dried on the outside, but still sopping wet in the middle of the mound. Jeans, a jumper, boots. This was somebody's outfit. As she frantically pulled the clothes apart, still laying on her stomach, too afraid to pull herself up, the bloodied body revealed itself. Their hair had been drenched in blood. It dreaded the head's spiral curls into clumps. The face was unrecognizable to her, a violent portrait of some poor, terrorized victim. Had they fallen through the roof? No. Had they broken in? No. Had they died? No. They had not died. Their head began to form that of a face through the blood. Eyes, nose, lips slowly moving, up and down, their last attempt to call out. Her golden brown skin, her beautiful eyes, her nose piercing. Oh no. It was her. Shirley. How could this be? Jeannette's eyes streamed. Her friend was here, hurt. Oh no. Was this her blood on her daughter's clothes? Jeannette looked around the room for further scrutiny. There had to be something around here. But as she attempted to pull herself up, the vibrations from her movement sparked Shirley's weary eyes open. She frowned. Her eyes quickly bulged in fear as she recognized Jeannette. She groaned, and she tried to move. Jeannette scurried over to grab hold of her fearful friend, but she did not act like that of a friend. Shirley screamed as she came near. Her hands moved in front of her face. Jeannette tried to calm her, but she was panicked. They were both panicked. "Shirley, it's okay. It's fine. Shirley, it's me!" But she screamed more. A desperate cry for help retched out of her, and with every ounce of strength she had, she battered her arms in front of her, repeatedly hitting Jeannette. And Jeannette found herself retaliating. She pushed Shirley's arms off of her, and she attacked her with more force. Then, for no other reason to her that seemed to occur, she was finally infuriated at Shirley for what she was doing. So much so, she took herself away from her and grabbed the light bulb next to her by the handle and screamed into Shirley's face. Her body erupted and her blood boiled. The black smoke shot out of her, and her head snapped backwards as she screamed and slammed the light bulb into her neck. The glass smashed, cutting open her throat as the electricity went pulsing through her body. She gurgled, squelched, and murmured. The end of the wire fizzed and burned. And when the smell of the flesh became too much, and the body began to quieten, Jeannette threw the live wire to the side. The silhouette of her covering Shirley's body. The room softened in sound. The noise inside Jeannette's head ceased. She panted as she rested on her knees, overlooking her victory. She was unsure of why Shirley reacted the way she did. But she was comfortable that in some way this entire incident had benefited her, and that guilt would not be something to plague her for time to come. It was a shame. She really liked Shirley, but she liked silence too. Now the main light in her attic was broken. The room was dimly lit only by that of the hallway through the hole. So trying to gain some kind of understanding of what had just happened, and why, was proving a little bit more difficult for Jeannette to comprehend at that moment in time. However, one thing was for certain. It was important that she was going to need to ensure that poor Shirley was actually dead, and at no point was she going to start screaming in the night. She climbed over her body, and whilst minding not to dirty her clothing any more, she checked Shirley's pulse, to which she found there was none. But blood continued to leak out of her, not with the striking force that it had before, but more like a stream, pooling into a lake below. She pulled over the mound of clothing and placed it next to Shirley's neck, so if the bleeding continued, it wouldn't at least ruin her floor. Jeannette quickly took herself back out of the attic, but she'd not realized her blood-soaked hands had left a trail from the entrance cover, down to the ladder, until she was already at the bottom, and with that, she thought it best to clean herself first before assisting to the incident above. She turned on the shower in the bathroom and removed all of her clothes. The heat was strong. Steam quickly filled the bathroom and covered any mirror or surface of shine. As she sat in the bathtub, the outpour of warm water beating over her, she found herself entranced by the tie-dye trail of reds and pinks. She sang along to her favourite song, and her body began to bend and sway along with her mind.
Decided to create a dream come true. So they sprinkle gold dust in your hair, golden starlight in your eyes of blue. That is why all the girls in town follow you around, just like me. Close to you.